Hi, and welcome back to Museum at Home. Now today we are heading back to the age of the Victorians, and we are going to explore the weird and wonderful world of Victorian scientists. Now, the Victorian age was a period of immense scientific discovery. Throughout the whole of the 19th century, great discoveries were made. Discoveries that still affect our lives today and that impact the research that scientists still do today. Charles Darwin introduced the idea of evolution by natural selection, that species adapt to suit their environments and to pass those characteristics on to their offspring. Dmitri Mendeleev created the first periodic table of the elements. Marie and Pierre Curie worked on radioactivity, and scientists like Michael Faraday, André-Marie Ampère, and James Clerk Maxwell were looking and investigating the idea of electromagnetism. So it was a busy age. And that's just a few of the amazing discoveries which were made by Victorian scientists. But what was life like for a Victorian scientist? Let's find out. Now, a great way of exploring what their world was really like is to look at what their rooms were like, what their homes were like. Now, take a look at this picture. What can you see? Well, let's have a think using our key question words. What? What does the picture show? What can we see? An image or words, text, or both? Who? Who created it? Who made it? Whose room is it showing? Who did it belong to? Why? Why was it made? What was it used for? Where? Where was it produced? And how? How was it made? Lots of different questions that can help us to think about this particular image. Now let's take the picture apart to work out what we can see. Can you spot a statue? Can you spot something to write with? Can you find something to read? And can you spot something that you might find nowadays in a school science lab? Well, all of those objects, all of those things appear in this picture. Now, this is a picture of a Victorian scientist's study. The scientist was a chap called Charles Davies Seborne, and he was an important scientist. He was interested in geology, the study of rocks and rock formations and the earth itself, and particularly in fossils, preserved remains of living organisms, and what they can tell us about the history of the natural world. So what can this picture of his study tell us about him and about life as a scientist? Well, first of all, take a look at the portrait in the round frame on the wall. Can you see it? Well, who is shown in that portrait, I wonder? It's a man with a beard. A very popular look for Victorian gentlemen, so doesn't give us that many clues. But this isn't any old Victorian gentleman. This is a portrait of Charles Darwin. Now, Darwin's ideas about adaptation and evolution would certainly have influenced a scientist like Seborne. In fact, fossils like the ones that Seborne studied and worked on were often used as evidence for the idea of evolution, because by looking at different fossils, scientists could investigate how species changed over time. But there is another famous face in this picture. Can you spot a bust on the top of the bookcase? Now, a bust is a statue that shows the upper half of a human figure. So you're looking for a statue that shows just the top half of a person. Can you spot it? Who do you think that could be? I'll give you a clue. It's a famous writer, a playwright and a poet who created some of the most famous characters in history. Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Hamlet, these were all his characters. So who do I mean? Well, it's William Shakespeare. Now, this might seem a strange choice of object for a Victorian scientist to put in pride of place in his study. But very often, science and the arts go hand in hand. Scholars and thinkers, both in the past, in history, but also nowadays, are interested in things, in topics, in subjects that cross a variety of different areas. And in this picture, we are being told that Seborne is one of these great thinkers, interested in loads of different subjects, and he's showing that to the world by putting a nice big bust of a famous writer in his study. If you look closely at the edge of the room, you can see another sculpture. It's a statue of a woman with no arms. Can you spot that? Well, that is a replica or a copy of the famous Venus de Milo sculpture, which is kept in the Louvre Museum in Paris. Again, Seborne is showing us that he is knowledgeable about lots of different subjects. Now, we often describe this type of person who's intelligent and knowledgeable about lots of different subjects and things as a polymath. To be a polymath, to be interested in lots of things, that was an important goal for scholars for hundreds of years, ever since the time of the Renaissance, a time when uncovering knowledge and becoming enlightened and broadening your mind was key to a person's success. So Victorian scholars like Seborne carried on with this tradition. Now, what else can we see in Seborne's study? Well, we can see that Seborne was a great lover of books. Look at the bookshelf. It is just bursting with books. They're crammed in. We don't know what books these are, but perhaps some of these books might be Seborne's own books that he wrote himself. Now, he wrote around 200 books and papers on natural history in his lifetime. His greatest project was an 11-volume book called the Index Animalium, and that listed all of the animals that had been discovered over a 100-year period. And on the right-hand side of the desk, which is absolutely overflowing with things, we can see a microscope, a symbol of scientific discovery. Microscopes are instruments which allow scientists to see things that are tiny, absolutely tiny, too small to be seen just by our eyes. Now, they're incredible instruments and really important pieces of scientific equipment, and we can trace them all the way back to the 13th century when magnifying lenses were first created. Now, over time, they became better, they became more powerful, and they were developed as telescopes and as microscopes in the 17th century. Then in the 19th century, about 200 years later, light and lots of different lenses started to be used more effectively, and the microscope developed. So, Charles Darwin designed his very own microscope that he kept in his study, and it was such important part of his collection of scientific objects that helped with his research. So this picture has given us an idea of the life of a Victorian scientist. But what was this picture made for? Well, it is something called an engraving, a picture made by printing using a design that has been etched into a piece of metal. It's a book plate, a picture that is slipped inside a book to show who owns it. Now, to find out a bit more about it, we can look at the text beneath it. Seborne's father was a well-respected engraver in London, and he designed and made these books, these plates, for his son's library. Judging by the bookshelves that we can see in this picture, he must have made hundreds and hundreds of book plates for all of his son's books. Now have a look at the words at the bottom of the book plate. They are in a language, it's Latin, and they read Ex Libris Charles Davies Seborne. What do you think that means? Well, think carefully about the word Libris. What other words have that combination of letters in them? Library, librarian. That's a clue that this is a word, this is something to do with books. So the whole phrase translates as from the books of Charles Davies Seborne. Now, if you've enjoyed this topic of Victorian scientists and what their lives were like, then head to the resource pack, and you can find that in the description of this YouTube video or on the Museum at Home website. And there's lots of activities that you can have a go at, including making your very own book plates for your books. And next time, join me as we explore the fascinating world of fossils. So, see you next time for another Museum at Home.